All right, public testimony. We have Joseph Sabag, IAC for Action. You're recognized.
Members
Morning,
of the
sir.
committee, good morning. I've come a long way to be here, so I appreciate the opportunity to respond to some of the questions that were just likewise presented to Representative Fine. My name is Joseph Sabag. I'm a lifelong Floridian. I'm an attorney and policy specialist. I lead a nationwide advocacy organization called IAC for Action, and I'm here to speak on behalf of millions of Jewish Americans this morning. Beginning in 2016 in the state of South Carolina, I had the distinct honor of serving as one of the primary legal experts helping to develop model legislation such as this bill under consideration today. I'm going to appear here today for several purposes. One, to explain the vital public policy interests of Florida citizens that will be protected by this law. Two, to briefly assist you with an explanation of what this bill does, what it does not do. Three, to provide clarity on the legality of such laws in terms of what's being proposed here today. And four, to explain the satisfactory outcome that will result from passage of this bill.
Mr. Sabag, if you could, I know we're just short on time. If you could try to keep it to about 3 minutes or so.
Will do. All right, to begin, we first need to consider the significant interests of Floridians here. Florida is home to over 750,000 Jewish Americans. Well over 5% of worldwide Jewry lives here. Data now proves that Jewish Americans are the most likely of all minority groups to be victimized in incidents of hate. These were the statistics that were just shared by Representative Fine. State officials and institutions like yourselves have a responsibility to protect citizens from hate and bigotry, and the authorities must now be given the tools to stem criminal conduct and discriminatory behavior motivated by anti-Semitism. Valid monitoring, informed analysis, and investigating and effective policymaking starts right here, right now with you. What will this bill do once it becomes law? As the bill presently stands, one, it will provide state officials with a standardized definition of anti-Semitism in order to assure appropriate treatment of incidents motivated by anti-Semitism, and two, it will require public education institutions to treat anti-Semitic discrimination in an identical manner to discrimination based on race. Now let's consider what this bill will not do. This legislation will have no impact whatsoever on free speech rights. Why? Because unlawful conduct is not protected by the First Amendment. Let me stress that point again. This bill deals with unlawful conduct, and unlawful conduct is not free speech. It's an outright lie to suggest that this law would in any way prevent anyone from expressing their point of view, or to stop them from sharing their beliefs, or from being harshly critical of Israel, or from even expressing blatant anti-Semitic points of view. To the contrary, this legislation actually accomplishes the exact opposite of what its opponents suggest. It explicitly protects First Amendment rights and furthermore works to oppose the unlawful suppression of speech of Jewish persons, which is a sad occurrence now happening all too often at educational institutions. It's also important that this committee be aware that this bill is entirely consistent with federal law and does not introduce or impact any core legal principles that have not already been upheld in court. Under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the U.S. government has prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in federally funded educational programs and activities. The U.S. Department of Education has issued guidance extending these protections of Title VI to include discrimination against Jewish persons based on ethnicity or ancestry. This bill will help to further compliance with Title VI. Cutting right past the opposition's First Amendment pretense, let me now turn to an explanation of why this bill's critics really hate it. The uniform definition of anti-Semitism it contains is drawn directly from the prevailing definition used by various parts of the U.S. government and other major countries as well, as Representative Fine mentioned. This definition recognizes that anti-Israel expressions can be repeatedly and systematically used as a means of conveying an anti-Jewish message. As Justice Brandeis famously stated, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The clarity that this definition provides means that anti-Semitism can no longer be whitewashed by claims of mere political opposition to Israel. Of course, this bill is far from the first time that this legislature has examined the issue of anti-Semitic bigotry. In 2016, the state of Florida, and many of you, passed a groundbreaking law regulating against anti-Semitism when it manifests in terms of commercial discrimination, otherwise known as BDS. I likewise served as one of the primary legal experts in developing that legislation as well. In passing this law, the legislature exercised an incredibly high level of moral clarity and predicated its passage on the recognition that anti-Semitism is alive and well in the world today. That's why it passed with a high level of bipartisan co-sponsorship, unanimously in the Senate, nearly unanimously in the House. And that's why 24 more states have followed Florida's lead since. It's
Sir,
critical.
if you could just try to bring it in.
I'm coming to an end here. Okay. Sadly, if you guys speak to Jewish students on campus today, you're highly likely to hear painful anecdotes of a truth that we're confronting at the moment. A concerted campaign is being waged to culturally, academically, and commercially discriminate against Israelis, Jews in general, their trade partners, and supporters. This is what's known as BDS. And it's the boycott, sanctions, and divestment movement. In the course of promoting discrimination against Israel and Jews, the BDS movement purposely uses misinformation and baseless claims, as well as classic anti-Semitic themes, such as the suggestion of Jewish subversion, conspiracy, dual loyalty, disloyalty, greed and economic control, and most importantly, blood libels. This was the reason for the outrage surrounding the recent series of anti-Semitic remarks by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who herself is a vocal BDS supporter.
Sir, if you could just wrap it up in 15 seconds.
To conclude, your passage of this bill today will clarify that Florida's state policy is to ensure that incidents of anti-Semitic hate and bias are treated equally under the law. Your passage will provide state officials and institutions with proper definitional tools for ascertaining the intent of persons who engage in unlawful activity. Your passage will ensure that public institutions remain in compliance with federal civil rights obligations in order to avoid potential litigation and financial liability. Your passage will protect against the suppression of free speech and academic freedom. And finally, your passage will once again set an example of moral clarity for Floridians and other states, and clearly sending the message that hate and bigotry have no place in Florida.
Thank you very much, sir. Next up,
May I ask a very brief question?
we've got to be really quick.
Very
so
brief.
we have got a full crowd today. So.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Sabag, are you confident, based on your analysis and legal expertise on this issue, and I speak as a co-sponsor of the BDS legislation, that the currently drafted language is based on discrimination and not on the viewpoint that may be expressed by any speaker?
Entirely
recognized.
confident. Yes, sir. We are well within the bounds of the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not apply to criminal activity. There is no First Amendment right to engage in criminal activity or to suppress the civil rights of others.
Thank you very
Mr. Chair,
much.
very briefly.
we
The answer
need-
was yes?
Yes,
I
the
think
answer
it's
is yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Next up, Meredith Brock Stanfield, CFO Jimmy Petronas, waves in support. Thank you very much. David Sleeth, Engage. You're recognized.